Be strong, be forward thinking, brainstorm. We've taken it one step from my parents' generation, we need to take it to the next.
Let Guru and these examples give you the strength to actually take you to the top and reach the ambitions.
Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savvy. Now, we've been away for a few weeks, but we're back, and there was actually an online special that you could actually check out on a YouTube page. We'll put the link up for you to have a look at. So we're back with some fantastic guests. We always try and find some great people from industry to bring in and share their views. This one's a bit of a special. We're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the Nepal situation, but very, very briefly. We are going to cover more in detail the election result, which is effectively almost a week ago. We actually got that shock result. Everyone was expecting it to be a hung parliament, but we ended up getting a kind of a small majority, if that makes sense, from the Tory party. So with me in the studio, I've got a couple of great people. I've got Ravi Arora, and I've also got Vickram Grewal. I'll let them introduce themselves so I don't steal their thunder. First of all, Ravi, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm the director of the Ethnic Minorities Advocacy Group. For short, it's called EMAG because it's quite a mouthful, so we say EMAG.
Sounds like a magazine.
Well, we do get confused up with the insurance company, actually, but right. I'll leave that to one side. Yeah, we're an organisation that is based in Western Twickenham area, and we cover the borough of Richmond and surrounding areas. And what we do, we look after the rights of vulnerable ethnic communities who want to access mainstream services, or whether they're isolated and need to actually meet people. Because what actually happens was about 20 years ago, that they were very isolated. So this organisation came about to increase community cohesion and bring lonely people together, especially with the ethnic backgrounds. And it has worked extremely well and is flourishing.
But it's more of a charity, isn't it?
It is a charity.
You're a director, aren't you?
I'm a director of this charity. We have to raise funds for everything that we actually promote, run support groups and events and activities, because what we actually want to do is not only support our communities, but also we want them to participate and integrate with the wider community, because what we actually do, we get people who come to this country who have absolutely no English at all. So we teach them English, we teach them skills, and what you actually find, they not only survive, they thrive and become part of the economic unit. They contribute socially, economically and culturally, which is exactly what we want to do.
It's quite interesting actually, isn't it? Because, you know, I know we're going to talk about politics in a sec, but, you know, there's a lot of bashing, inverted commas, about immigrants coming into the UK, whether they're actually contributing or not, or whether they're a burden. And what we find is that countries that do have a lot more immigrants coming in actually enrich the economy. Just picking up from your point.
Absolutely. I think the strength of this country, it lies partly on the immigration. They have contributed so richly in terms of the variety of everything that we do. I mean, food, clothes, music, you name it, the immigrants have influenced the way the British live. That is no mistake. You can't escape that at all.
Fantastic. And Vickram, so good to have you back on the show again. Sure. Thanks so much for coming in. I know we've been rushing around, both of us, trying to get from the city back out to West London to record. You've recently changed jobs from the previous thing that you were doing. I always describe you as the whiz kid financial analyst, but you're doing a lot more now, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Sure. So now I'm working for an American asset management house called Alliance Bernstein, working in the UK fixed income sector, analysing a variety of UK bonds and analysing them in active portfolios. As well as that, I do a lot of charitable work, and I'm a vice chairman of a UK charity called Sidyog Charity, which donates a lot of food and clothing to India and the whole of Asia, and we're hoping to expand it here as well.
Are you going to do anything for Nepal, you think?
We're hoping to. We're hoping to get a few fundraisers going and send over a lot of quilts and clothes and whatever we really can to help them.
Okay, fantastic. So just on that note, we're just very going to quickly cover the fact that this week, sadly, there's been a second earthquake. They do say that when you have a big earthquake, there are other earthquakes, or kind of ripple effects that take place that kind of can be in the same place, or they can be further up. And in this case, it was actually near towards Mount Everest, but the actual ripples were felt all the way in India, and sadly, thousands more died, and it has made the situation even worse. I mean, there are some situations where the city, you see a lot of the footage in terms of the main capital, and you see it's really bad. I saw some footage that were really, really awful, where people were just running and there was just smoke coming out of some of the buildings, and some of the people are quite scared to go back into their houses as well because they're not sure about the stability. But out in the villages, it's apparently really, really bad. A good friend of mine called Harmy that went out as part of another group called World CKD. He only came back last week, and you know, I've seen some of the shots that they took out there and footage that they did, and it's really, really bad. I know Sikh Channel as well. Lots of organisations that are doing work. Sikh Channel in particular have raised over £28,000 through shelter box investments, which are these boxes that go out and they're able to effectively immediately provide relief through a set of essential aids, and also some shelter that can be built from that, tents and stuff. So if you are contributing to charities, well done, and please keep it going, because those people really need us, those who can sleep under a roof and those who don't have anything at all because their lives are lost around them. Let's change the subject now to talk about the election special that we wanted to look at the aftermath of the election result. The first point to make is, isn't it interesting that the poll, the exit poll, they describe it, which was done by a professor, he was on all night. Poor chap was working really, really hard like the rest of them, and he had a 22,000 person sample, and they were right within 3 to 4% predicting that the Tories would actually win. The first question I'd like to kind of put across: do you think the UK population are shy Tories?
It's a good question, and you can ask that question. I think you talk about politics in the public domain, everyone will have an opinion.
Yeah. Or there's lazy Labourites, isn't there?
Yeah. And some people are really passionate about what they believe, and discussions become arguments, and sometimes the logic can disappear because of the passion. But I think what actually happens in a polling booth is really very, very personal. You may hear all the arguments, you may even hear all the logical arguments for a party, but if you do not believe or have any enthusiasm for that party, faith, or you're just totally against the philosophy of that party, you will always vote the other one, the one that you want.
Media is quite important, isn't it?
Almost like blindly vote Labour or Tory, depending upon, sometimes it's a family thing.
So is media important to influence your decision at that point, in terms of all the things that are running over 4 weeks? 4 weeks is a long period as a campaign, isn't it, to influence you?
I think it depends on the individual. Some people, I will call them the floating voters. Those are the people who the parties want to influence, because it is the floater which dictates who goes into power, I think, in my opinion. Then you've got the dedicated Tories, you've got the dedicated Labourites or Blairites, or whoever you want, what you want me to call them. You've got the Liberal Party, which have really suffered. So that's a very interesting situation.
So let's have a quick look at the statistics. So apparently there's a professor called Stephen Fisher from Oxford, who's a professor of politics, and he's done some analysis, and he says there's a special term he's using, which is a particular type of surge. He's saying that those candidates that effectively have won in 2010, who came back again to get re-elected, the electorate are a little bit more sympathetic, and then statistically they give them 4% more in terms of what actually ends up. But what was the reason why the Labour Party didn't do as well as they could have done? So one of the theories is suggesting that a lot of the votes were taken away from those previously in constituencies where the Tories had come in second, and effectively the Tories took the lead instead of the Liberals, right? So, and also obviously we had a massive vote turnout in Scotland, which is in some cases has been a bit of a Labour, stronghold in certain areas. So that compounded to have that difference. Do you agree with that? Putting your analyst head on for a second.
Sure, and there's always an incumbent effect. If you're the current MP of that constituency, you'll always have a sway of people, because when you go and knock on their door, you're not knocking on their door as a candidate. You are a candidate, but you're not someone that they haven't seen before. You've been tried and tested for 4 years or 5 years, and the electorate are very used to you in that area, and they're used to seeing you as an MP. But that didn't happen in Scotland. We saw Douglas Alexander, the chief campaigning officer for the Labour Party, lose out to a 20-year-old SNP candidate who had pretty much no political experience. What we saw in Scotland was something phenomenal that this country has not seen before. What most Europe hasn't seen was such a huge wave of nationalism. And it wasn't necessarily Scotland saying that they want to leave the Union, even though I'm sure that had an effect. It was more so about Scotland saying to the Westminster Party, especially the Labour Party, you need to work harder for our votes. And Scotland abundantly saying that they're against austerity and Trident, which the Labour Party really found hard to relate to, because they towed the line so closely with the Tories on the economic factor, because the Tories were consistently 20 points ahead of them in the polls for that. And that kind of made them all look the same. So they lost that distinguished look that Labour always had for the working class.
Do you think that both parties, I mean the main parties, right, and I know it was interesting, it was probably a high-risk strategy, I don't know who made the decision, but it paid off. The Tories went in saying there's effectively £12 billion worth of cuts they need to do, but didn't provide any detail. Now, each one of them had a financial plan. Some of them claimed that it had been independently audited, right? So, I don't know, are these plans worth their weight in terms of, you know, the thickness of the material that they're producing?
The Institute of Fiscal Studies,
yes.
they actually did comment upon the numbers, and they said none of the parties' sums actually add up.
Right.
And they were wondering how are they going to finance some of the promises they have made, which I can't remember now myself.
Right. Okay.
But there was no, the books were not balancing, and so when an institution like that says, okay, there's something not quite right here, who are you to believe? And then the trust.
So as a member of the public, we can't trust anything, can we? We're making a decision based on data which isn't necessarily truly close to any reality. You know? And when people are pushed, I mean, it was an interesting thing about the Liberal Party that at the end of the day, just a week before, had said, oh, look, they might do loads of cuts in, you know, child benefit and stuff, you know, and then there was a staunch deniance from David Cameron saying, no, we're not going to do that, you know. They don't actually say we're not going to do it at all, but we're not going to do it. They might have said, we're not going to do it yet. So again, it comes down to semantics, doesn't it, about what is said?
Well, I personally think that the electorate are a lot more clever than some political strategists actually give them credit for. I think they saw the Liberal Party's manifesto being a bartering tool. It was so centralist and so general that they could just go with any party in their coalition.
And they did that towards the end, didn't they? They were saying that our hands are open, we can go to either party.
We even saw Nick Clegg on Sunday on the Andrew Marr show saying that he's even in favour of an in-out referendum. That wouldn't be a red line for them. And any Liberal that would vote would be completely disillusioned by that, because they're all pro-European,
they are, yeah.
As anyone on the left would be. We saw the Labour Party be very strict with their manifesto, saying that even if they had a coalition with the SNP or vote of confidence or whatever you want to call it, they wouldn't barter away their manifesto. And actually, I think David Cameron inside didn't really want to stick to his manifesto, because he's not as right-wing as a lot of the Thatcherites that are within his party right now. And he actually would have been happier with a slight Liberal coalition to keep him more towards the centre than the right.
So now that on the Friday, the aftermath was that, you know, 3 leaders resigned. So now there's big talk about who's going to replace Nick Clegg, who's going to replace Ed Miliband, and whether or not he does stay or go Nigel Farage. You know, because 1 minute he's in, next minute he's out, and then he's back in again. But that's a different story. Couple of questions here, right? First of all, it's the first time in Parliament we've seen that there's nobody from a Sikh background. How important do you think it is for Parliament today to reflect the society that we live in? You know, coming back to the point you were making earlier on about the fact that you know people come in and immigrants make a great contribution, right? Should that not be reflected in the House of Parliament as well?
I mean, in principle, I would agree with you, but I think it's very important to have the right person representing you, regardless of background. I know that there should be representative of communities in any field that we do, in terms of in industry, commerce, any sector that we're in. But I think when we're looking at the leadership question as well. But not
Yeah,
only
that was
just-
going to be my second
yeah.
question. Which was
No.
about the fact that a lot of people talking about
Yeah,
the fact
we're
that there
talking
might be
about-
somebody
yeah.
who may not be of white colour.
I think what's really important is have the right person leading, whether it's black, white, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, whoever. It is the right person that should lead the country for all the right reasons.
Yeah, but this is in a world where everything is fair, isn't it?
Well-
Because you might notice that if you look at the current, and even if it was the same Labour as well, a lot of people have gone to the same schools, even with Tony Blair as well, they've all gone to the same schools, they've all had that similar upbringing, they've all done PPE at Oxford, politics, philosophy and economics, they've all got those degrees. Does that mean, and then what's interesting is some of them have never had jobs. And you might find someone who's a health minister who's never worked in the health industry or has any medical background, but they're making key decisions. Or is it that the civil servants are the ones that run the whole country?
Well, there is that Yes Minister programme that we all know about so many years ago, and I would, to a certain extent, agree the civil service is very much part of government, and whoever then comes into power is probably influenced by the chief people in the civil service of what can be done and what can't be done. Obviously, government has great influence in what direction they want to do, where they want to go, but it's the civil service, to a certain degree, you probably have to execute and...
Not physically execute.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So what do you reckon? Do you think the same? It doesn't matter, whether you're yellow, green, orange, or purple. That you've got to get the right person.
No, and I think that's what's wrong with politics these days. Everyone thinks that to be the right and able candidate, you have to be from Oxford or an Etonian, and I don't think that's necessarily true. And when we look at our Sikh community, I go to many events and I'm part of many organisations, and the amount of young Sikh people, and even people that are older as Sikhs that are so able, but yet have not been given a parliamentary seat in any election, it's a complete travesty, I think.
So they're not being given a parliamentary seat, and I really did want to pick this subject as well. But I do want your answer to the question with regards to the leadership as well.
Sure.
Do you think that a lot of political parties across the board play it safe? So they go, actually, we've got somebody who's from an ethnic type background, we won't give them that seat because there's a possibility that that electorate may not vote that person in. So they play it safe, right? So certain people we know have been given seats that are out in Northern Ireland or whatever, and in other cases they've been given seats where, I know a couple of people who unfortunately didn't make it. I mean, if you look at Tan, he did really well if you look at his figures over in Gravesham. Chaz didn't make it over in Plymouth. I think that Tan was probably close, right? But the fact is that sometimes there are safe seats and sometimes there are not. But I wonder what the executives are thinking, the executive committees are thinking when they choose their candidates.
Sure. I can give you a great example of that with the Labour Party in terms of London and their candidates. A third of them were ethnics, which represents a population. They had the right average age of around 33 of their candidates. Their average age coincided with the average age of Londoners. And we had more women than men on the seats. That's the appeal to the electorate as well. So they definitely try and choose a candidate that will fit best for that area, but I don't necessarily think that's the case anymore. Ethnic minorities are making such a huge contribution to this country day in, day out, working hard, as are immigrants, which is not really exposed in the media, and they need to be seen for that reason. And I think the reason why the Conservative Party only had a slim majority of 12 was because they haven't really tapped into the ethnic minorities. And that's why we saw Labour gain 3 seats in London compared to the previous election, where in the rest of the country they probably didn't fare that well.
Interesting. And then so in terms of when you come to the leadership part of it,
Yeah.
right? So obviously there are some candidates that have been suggested, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the leadership thing...
On either side, whether it be Liberals or Labour?
Sure, I mean, with the Liberals it's a bit more easier because there's only 8 MPs, and it's quite clear who'd be the leadership candidate there. With the Labour Party, we've seen a lot of people come out in the post-mortem and pretty much dismiss Ed Miliband for his campaign, saying that he was a left-wing leader and he took the party to the left-wing. I don't necessarily think that's true. There were some policies like the bedroom tax, like ending 0-hour contracts, like the mansion tax, his views on them, which I think were absolutely right. But then his hard stance on immigration, and as I said, the Labour budget and manifesto in terms of the cuts and where they would come from were exactly the same as the Tories. So he wasn't as left-wing as people thought. But I think that we do need to see in the Labour Party now a centre regaining the centre ground, because I truly believe that the electorate defaulted to the Tories. They didn't exactly desire them.
Okay, so let's talk about the electorate just quickly for a second. Now, you mentioned 33 being an average age or whatever, right? So I don't know how Russell Brand is, right? We're not going to go into detail about what was spoken about with Ed Miliband going on. A lot of people praised him for going on board, going to a programme you could argue could be described as being, it was described as a joke, inverted commas, by the other political party. But let's look at the figures, right? You know, 1 million hits through the Daily Telegraph website, whereas the Daily Telegraph website may only actually get 800,000 itself. So clearly people are tuning in. Are they tuning in because it's Russell Brand, or are they tuning in, and Russell Brand was doing a special, or are young people, whatever that means, engaging more with social media, more with kind of those people that are talking about politics from a perspective that they can understand? So are we alienating a group of society that isn't necessarily wanting to vote, apart from Russell Brand's stance that says, what's the point in voting, in his view, right? So I was talking to someone about this today, and they said, don't shoot the messenger, right? Because maybe he's just kind of venting what people actually feel, you know?
I mean, from my own experience in this election, I spoke to many families. I campaigned across many constituencies, and I saw that young people were very disenfranchised with politics, and they turned to people like Russell Brand because they feel that he speaks about the real topics and real things that they see in society, whether it's huge inequality, whether it's the fact that they won't be able to leave their parents' houses now because they can't afford a deposit, and they won't be able to aspire and be property owners and become something one day. And I think a man cannot be called a joke if he has 13 million on Twitter. 13 million followers is more than the Prime Minister and anyone else.
They could go in because it's a bit of a laugh, isn't it?
But it wasn't. I don't think it was a laugh, because
I don't mean that particular programme, but that he's a bit of a laugh. You know, he comes up with jokes and stuff.
He comes up with a lot of headline catchy things, and he was true to his word that he interviewed Ed Miliband. He asked him very straightforward and hard questions, and he got straightforward and hard answers with that. And I don't think that hindered Ed Miliband in any way, because if he could tap into that young vote, which a lot of pollsters that got it wrong said that the lazy Labour voters that didn't come out, if Ed Miliband tapped into that, which I'm sure that he must have got some reaction from there, it's everything to gain in such a closely called election before the exit polls came out.
So I'm sure there'll be lots of analysis after. What do you think?
Well, I think Miliband had a hard time from the right-wing press.
Okay.
I mean, if you ever saw pictures of
Apparently he's a
Miliband
nice bloke,
in the
actually,
paper,
yeah.
it was always quite a derogatory prose. His eyes were closed, his mouth was open, or he had a hamburger stuffed in his mouth, and a bacon sandwich. It was always very, very derogatory. And I think part of politics is image. Whether we want to ignore it or not, we can't. Politics in this country is becoming like the American system.
Yeah,
it's about how you
look, what you're wearing,
what you're wearing, how you present yourself, how do you present your arguments, how do you speak, who do you look at? Because Miliband compared himself to the Gromit and
Wallace and Gromit.
Wallace and Gromit.
Yeah. Apart from that, there was a Milifandom which took place.
And so the kind of rather derogatory elements to the campaign. And sometimes he forgot to talk about the deficit in his key speech, didn't he, as well? Right. And so he was really always under attack. Is he a leader? Is he the right leader? Is he strong enough? Is he tough? And do you remember the Jeremy Paxman question? Are you tough? Sure, I'm tough, or words of that effect. So I think he had a huge leadership credibility problem.
Okay.
And
which wasn't helped by the media, right?
Which didn't help Labour, and maybe to a degree their policies did not appeal to aspiring young people.
Right, okay. So that basically the lessons that we got to learn is, in terms of is that we need to look out for a lot more independence in terms of, rather than going to our newspapers and reading our newspapers for...
Well, I mean, I encouraged everyone when I knocked on people's doorsteps and spoke to them. I said, look at people's manifestos, look at the party's manifestos, and then make a decision. Don't read what the Telegraph and who they endorse, or the Sun or anyone. Of course we were going to see Ed Miliband attacked by the media. He took on Murdoch. Yeah. He was one of the only leaders in British history that took on the almighty, all-powerful Rupert Murdoch. Yeah. And we saw papers like The Sun, who are typically right-wing, even though they endorsed Tony Blair in his time. They endorsed the Conservatives here, Scotland, they endorsed the SNP, who were a far left-wing party.
Interesting, isn't it?
So
I saw the comparison between
exactly.
both.
So these papers became so anti-Miliband, we only saw the Guardian endorse him in the end. Even the Independent, who people would say, centre-left.
I'm going to have to stop it there. We're literally running out of time, and I'd like to say thanks so much for coming in. We could talk for another 20 minutes, half an hour, 3 days on this subject, but we hope that you've enjoyed the show this time round. We look forward to seeing you next time. My thanks again to the guests who've rushed from the city in their various jobs to be here to share their views, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to send me an email, you can do that at info@seekchannel.tv. We look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, Waigajiga Khalsa, Waigajiga.